there's a fine line between being really thoughtful and methodical and taking your time. And then there's this point where it's like, okay, it's time to send it. It's time to start moving. It's time to start going. It's never necessarily going to be perfect. And that's okay. You just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
That's Lindsay Kocka. Lindsay is a professional yoga instructor, natural movement coach, mobility specialist, meditation teacher, and myofascial release practitioner. She blended all that training with her passions for fly fishing and working with outdoor athletes. With that, her business, Wadewell, was born. I'm Angie, and this is See Her Outside, brought to you by the Cairn Project and the Summit Scholarship Foundation. We share stories of women, girls, and gender-diverse adventurers to promote belonging and visibility in nature. We hope that this story inspires you to advocate for a more inclusive outdoors. Have you ever thought about building a business related to adventure? Over the past couple decades in the United States, women-owned businesses have been on the rise. Today, about 40% of U.S. businesses are women-owned. According to the National Women's Business Council, this is up a whopping 114% from just 20 years ago. Although we've made strides as a society, women still face barriers to entrepreneurship. An obvious one is balancing family life with business. A less visible factor? Funding. In 2023, companies founded solely by women received under 3% of venture capital funding. Meanwhile, many women entrepreneurs who manage to deal with funding and family barriers still face bias and struggle to be taken seriously by others. Personally, I never thought I would run my own business. I simply never saw anyone who reminded me of me while running a business. But now, as a business owner myself, I know that it's more important than ever for women to share stories and resources around business ownership. Which is why I called up Lindsay of Wadewell to hear her story. Did you always imagine that you would be running your own business and working for yourself?
No, absolutely not. Although I will say I have been working, in contractor roles where I've been sort of pseudo in charge of my own destiny for actually a really long time. Starting in my early 20s, I was a bike messenger for several different companies in Minneapolis, and then moved on to working as a yoga instructor and fitness trainer. So, as much as those positions offered me a lot of freedom and flexibility, actually launching a full-on business was definitely never part of the plan. So, I've worked for a lot of small businesses though, so I feel like there was a lot of paving of that path with just being influenced by small business owners over the years.
So how did you start to merge fly fishing with business?
My first sort of stab at merging fly fishing into business was really the merging of fly fishing into yoga and fitness. So when I launched my business, the focus, and still much of the focus even today, was revolving around functional mobility and mindfulness and functional movement for fly anglers in particular. So when I started thinking about working in the fly fishing world, what I really wanted to do was launch something that was different from just your traditional fly fishing kind of trajectory of, guiding.
This is one of the coolest parts of small business, creating something different than what's ever been done before. In our earlier See Her Outside episode with Dr. Danielle, we talked about the idea of combining two of your talents to create something special and new. For Lindsay, it was clear that blending fly fishing with functional movement was a talent of hers, one that's rare and needed by others. But similar to an adventure, business ideas don't always go to plan, and pivoting is a key skill to practice.
Wadewell has shape-shifted so many times. Really, it began during the pandemic is really where it kind of launched ahead and moved forward. And I was doing a lot of virtual education, and that was very specific to stepping in and supporting, different fly fishing groups, clubs, organizations, and sharing online classes, essentially, in the same way that you would think of like an online yoga class or an online fitness class. I was very much offering those types of classes, but more specific to the fly angler's experience of the challenges that come along with walking and wading and, moving through like dense forested areas and what it's like to move across a river and what it's like to be able to, these like functional movements that we use all the time that can be easy to take for granted until they're gone, like being able to squat, being able to get up and down from the ground, being able to hopefully feel good in your body and mitigate chronic pain, mitigate falls, and mitigate injuries. So, I was doing a lot of that to begin. And then I launched into the women's specific fly fish and wellness retreats and have done a good deal of retreat coordination and facilitation throughout the country. Super, super fun. And now I've been kind of pivoting back to a little bit more of the online education in particular. I step in and guest facilitate at quite a few different fly fish schools and programs as well. Just being that what I do is pretty unique and also just really integral to the fly fishing experience. So it's been cool to also be able to move into other people's spaces and guest facilitate for them as well. But yeah, these days I'm still doing, the in-person education. I do also really enjoy just basic fly fishing education as well. So I do a fair amount of, just like 101 clinics. I'm by no means an expert fly angler. I've just been fly fishing for, about 10 years. So I still consider myself pretty green. But at the same time, I've learned a lot and enjoy sharing that knowledge too. So I do a little bit of both with Wadewell in terms of, mostly the functional movement and mobility education classes, and then a little bit of fly fish specific education here and there.
What were the early challenges of combining this passion with your work? Because I'm totally there where it is a blessing and a curse to have passion so interwoven with trying to make a living. Did you have any stumbling blocks along the way?
Oh yeah, so many. It's funny how my work was met when I sort of launched what I was doing, which at the time it was coined Fluent Movement on the Fly. And again, very specifically teaching functional mobility and mindful movement for fly anglers. People sort of either really got it or really didn't get it because there just hasn't been many people historically who have really, even though to me it just seems so intuitively obvious that anything that we're doing in the outdoors in particular, we're moving around in variable terrain. It's challenging. It challenges our balance and all of the things. So to me, it made a lot of sense. But I received a lot of feedback coming from both sides, where it was either like, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome. I can't believe that someone's finally doing this and talking about this. These resources are so helpful." And then the other side of people being like, this makes zero sense. Why would you even need this? It's just walking. It's just wading. It's just, whatever. It's just fly fishing. So I feel like one of the things that was a challenge right out of the gate was like, oh, you're doing something that's actually really quite different and new. There was a decent amount of criticism coming from this space where I'm like, oh, is this really going to resonate with people? Does this make sense? And I think that it's so easy to focus on, anytime you get any kind of quote unquote negative feedback or criticism or critique, it can be really easy to just hyper focus on that and forget about the 15 people that were like, ooh, I get it. This is amazing. Thank you. You're helping me. So that was honestly, I think the biggest challenge right out of the gate is if you're solving a problem and it's new and it's just sort of outside of the realm of what's already been, it can be kind of hard. So that was tough for sure.
I've often heard that entrepreneurship is this catalyst to facing all of your inner demons that are not necessarily related to just business, but the rest of your life. Did you find that true? And if so, what were pieces of building this business that really made you confront other ways that you were living your life?
Oh, I mean, perfectionism is got to be number one. And that, and I would fully categorize that as a demon in terms of and it's such a culture, just so deeply embedded in our culture too, this idea of perfectionism. And that was something that I really had to come to terms with very soon on, of like, there's a fine line between being really thoughtful and methodical and taking your time. And then there's this point where it's like, okay, it's time to send it. It's time to start moving. It's time to start going. It's never necessarily going to be perfect. And that's okay. You just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So I feel like that was a really big part of just a hurdle in terms of running a business, in terms of just who I am as a human and areas to grow. Yeah, I mean, also just being okay with pivoting, being okay with receiving constructive feedback. I mean, that is never easy, and it's part of the world of running a business is if you're willing to, or if you're wanting to grow, and if you're wanting to really help people, you have to listen to the people, and it maybe isn't going to line up with what you thought it was going to be, and that's okay too. So that's hard in personal life and professional life.
Ooh, this idea of perfectionism comes up so often for women, and not just in business, but in outdoor sport as well. I'm curious if you have a story, whether it's about you or somebody that you've worked with in the fly fishing world, where you have directly seen the benefits of fly fishing and that mindfulness help ease some of that perfectionism.
I'm sitting here scanning, searching for an anecdote, but it's fly fishing is just filled with so many screw ups. It's just like the nature of the sport. It's also the nature of the work that I do when we're specifically talking about mindful movement in the outdoor space. It's like, that's why I teach people how to get up. Literally, I teach, get up patterns for when you fall down, because you're going to fall down. As much as we love to focus on fall mitigation and keeping people upright and hopefully falling less, you're still going to fall down and you're still going to be getting back up again. And yeah, it's just like the metaphor for all things in life. But it's really the reality of fly fishing in general. It's just such a process. It's one of those things, it's one of those sports, endeavors, practices that you really can't rush, because there is a lot to it. And it's never really going to be perfect when you're in an outdoor space where there's so much that you can't control too, right? Like, you're not in a controlled environment. You're outside, you're fishing for fish who have their own ideas at hand. You're amidst wildlife that has its own ideas. You're amidst, rivers and streams and lakes and whatever, and like all these different components that you can't control. So there's this constant ebb and flow of doing what you can do and being okay with not being in control of all these external factors that are at play.
Being okay with not being in control is another similarity between business ownership and outdoor adventure. In my own life, outdoor sports often teach me lessons about how to handle those sticky moments at work and in relationships. I wondered if Lindsay also found mental wellness benefits in her earlier days of fly fishing.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my own journey with mental health and mental wellness, really, for as long as I can remember, when I was a kid, I was a really shy kid and had kind of a fair amount of social anxiety growing up young. And then, run-ins with both anxiety and depression kind of just throughout my entire life. When I really started to address it a little bit more thoroughly is when I discovered yoga and mindfulness and meditation practice, and kind of realized, oh, wow, this is really, really therapeutic and beneficial to my mental health. So it sort of started there. And then, of course, my relationship with fly fishing has really been deeply related to my mental health as well. So starting to merge these ideas of mindful movement and meditation and, kind of just mindfulness in general, and taking that into the outdoor space, and then finding that fly fishing in and of itself really felt like a seamless transition from mat practice, studio practice, just that overall practice of being more mindful and tending to my mental health in the outdoor space. So I feel as though my experiences in the outdoors it's always been pretty obvious of like, wow, this feels really good and this is really healthy for me, whether or not it's been hiking or cycling. But the fly fishing added a different component in terms of the literal movement of fly casting and the pace of fly fishing for me has always been really, really slow. So I spent a lot of time mountain biking. And my work with Cairn Project was bike packing specific, which bike packing is great because it's a little bit slower, but I really like to lean into the slower outdoor practices. So fly fishing was a really nice complement to that.
That's right. Lindsay was a trailblazer for the Cairn Project. More on that later. But I wanted to hear more about why fly fishing impacted Lindsay so much that she built a business around the sport. On Lindsay's blog, she writes, "I fell in love with fly fishing precisely because of its richness. It truly is a feast for the senses, a 10-course meal perfectly paired in some of the most beautiful venues the earth has to offer. Consequently, I've also found that the more time I've spent shifting my gaze towards those many other elements, the stronger angler that I've become. Whether or not you have a tendency to be incredibly focused or catching fish every time you're out on the water, or you feel fairly neutral about the catching itself, there's always ample opportunity to enrich your experience in these ecosystems by simply seeing what's there and becoming actively and enthusiastically engaged with the gift that is exploring the great outdoors with a fly rod in hand." Dreamy, right? But at this point in our conversation, I realized I knew hardly anything about fly fishing. I asked Lindsay how fly fishing compares to my brain's image of fishing, which is grabbing a rod and sitting out by a lake or in a canoe.
The simplest way that I can describe what fly fishing is it's the naturalist style of fishing. It is a style of fishing where you have to be really, really deeply attuned to the environment that you're in. And you have to kind of work as an investigator or an excavator the entire time. So there are a lot of different components. I think that a couple of the things that make fly fishing really, really unique is that there is a huge emphasis on the fly cast itself. And I think when a lot of people think of fly fishing, that is the image that comes to mind, whether or not you've seen, a river runs through it or whatever. But you see the fly cast, and I think in most people's minds, it is meditative in its sort of characteristics. It's slow, it's graceful, it's intentional. And so I think the mechanics of the fly cast and the fact that people spend lifetimes really deeply studying fly casting and really approaching it as a mindful movement practice is one of the things that is really, really unique to fly fishing. So much emphasis on just the casting that sits almost outside of the catching of fish. So I think that as much as most fly anglers are out and setting out to catch fish, so many people are spending so much time studying their fly cast on dry land, on grass, when they're not even fishing, because of the fact that it's very intricate and there's a lifetime that you can learn with the fly cast. So I think that's one of the things that really sets it apart. One of the things that I think is super interesting about fly fishing. It's really the main thing that drew me to fly fishing to begin with. And understanding entomology, so getting really geeky about bugs and, again, your environment, spending time turning over rocks and looking for bugs and determining, okay, this is what's at play right now in this particular fishery, and then choosing the correct flies to match those bugs. I mean, there's such a cool process that inherently slows you down and asks you to really take in all of the details of your environment. This idea of understanding how to read water and how to really, really deeply understand fish behavior and fish biology, which, that comes into play with any kind of fishing. But I think fly anglers really know how to take their time because they know that they have to. So I think that generally speaking, the fly fishing practice is one that just is centered around mindfulness. It's centered around paying attention. It's centered around observing. And again, it kind of just forces you to slow down in a way that's a little bit different than just throwing a worm on a hook and chucking it out into the water and hoping that a fish grabs it. So, yeah.
I think it's so true when you imagine a professional mountaineer, right? You always imagine the summit selfie, or you imagine a mountain biker and you see someone flying downhill with their hair whipping behind them. And when you imagine a fly fisher, you imagine that like glamour shot of the cast, right?
Yeah.
Exactly how you described. And we don't see that the struggle, like you were talking about, of dealing with that urge for perfection and getting that perfect cast and getting that perfect fish and perfect day and all of that. Is there any other messiness that you think we don't see around the sport that has impacted you in some way?
Yeah. I mean, that's really what my work was born out of, was tangled up in willows, falling down, feeling like, wow, I'm I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a fitness trainer, I should be able to move well outside. And then I took up fly fishing and was like, oh my gosh, if this is really, really challenging for me, this has got to be really, really challenging for so many people. Trying to wade a river where it's just filled with slippery rocks and you're just on your butt 90% of the time, getting flies caught into caught in trees behind you. There's so many parts of, getting hooks in your in your finger. There's so many things that when it's new, and it's stuff that you certainly don't see really portrayed, on social media or whatever it is. It's, everyone has the grip and grin shot of the fish or the beautiful cast or just the beautiful vista, but not so much your butt in the river, or, just tangled, frustrated, having maybe what's not even a really enjoyable experience because you're just having a hard time. So I feel like all of those things are a big part of the process, and everybody experiences them. Rarely do people talk about them. And I guess that's another piece as to why I was like, let's talk about falling down. Let's like talk about the physical side that is kind of vulnerable, but it's very real. And everyone feels it and everyone does experience it. Even if you're an elite athlete, you're slipping, you're sliding, and it's a challenge.
Whenever I see a catalog of outdoor gear, there's always those perfect cast shots and everything. Where do you think fly fishing is not being inclusive as an industry, and especially maybe not welcoming of women? And how can you see that changing in the future? I know that's a loaded question.
Oh man. I mean, we've made a lot of strides without question. And there have been so many incredible women over the past several decades in particular who have really made it their mission to elevate and amplify women. And I think that it's incredible how much progress has been made. And that being said, it's still a male dominated sport, it's still a male dominated industry, and there is still much to be done. I think that generally speaking, we're beginning to see more women represented in the media and, on catalog covers or whatever it may be. We are seeing certainly less in terms of body inclusivity. I would say that we're still very much leaning toward, and I would say this is probably true outdoor industry by and large, right? Is like we're still really honing in on that, like, quote unquote athletic fit, like whatever that image is. So I feel like there's just a long ways to go in that in general, of just being more representative of all bodies, women of color in particular. I think that we have a long ways to go in terms of really positioning women as industry professionals. So there's a lot of space for women to be volunteers. There's a lot of women run fly fishing organizations. And I feel like oftentimes women are sort of delegated to just these volunteer roles. And we see still way less women who are guides, way less women who are instructors, way less women who are outfitters, business owners, and really women who are positioned and understood as being top of their class in the industry. I feel like we will typically see, this very small handful of like, these are, the 5 or 10 women who are like the women of fly fishing, and not a great representation of women as a whole. And I feel like a lot of that comes from, well, if I want a guide here in Montana, probably I first have, there's I feel like such a process that sort of, it still feels like a little bit of like good old boys club situation where it's like, if you want a guide, you probably have to work at a fly shop first for a year or two and sort of like apprentice, so to speak, at a fly shop before potentially being able to guide. And if you step into a fly shop in Bozeman, you will very rarely see a woman working. So if you want to work at a fly shop, you have to be okay still with being the only woman in that space and probably having like a 90% male clientele in the space as well. So it's intimidating, right? Like you have to really be invested in like, okay, I'm all right and I'm okay with being a minority in this space where I might feel uncomfortable or feel like not taken seriously, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like there's that kind of like cultural red tape that can be intimidating and be a barrier to entry for a lot of women in terms of moving into these more professional realms of fly fishing. So I feel like overall it kind of just holds us back in many ways.
There are so many parallels between those barriers to entry of the sport and also running a business or starting a business. One of those parallels is that default feeling of, okay, well, before you can be a guide, you have to work in a shop. Before you start a business, you have to spend X amount of years, working for other brands or working for other companies. And that's not necessarily true. I think I'm unemployable at this point because I do so much better on my own than as an employee. But I think a huge piece of that is money and talking about money. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about how typically in our culture, when it comes to entrepreneurship or even being an employee, we teach men to ask for raises. We teach men to negotiate. We teach men to invest their money. And typically, a lot of through the 1900s and into now, we've been teaching women to cut back. Don't buy that latte. Stop spending. Don't buy the Taylor Swift Eras Tour tickets. Men aren't typically getting reprimanded for buying NFL tickets. So there's just a lot of confusing messaging towards women who are looking to start a business. But what have you learned about being in charge of your own finances as a business owner and as a woman in this society?
I love to talk about this topic actually, because I have come up against, and this sort of circles back to, what we were discussing in terms of personal demons and also just being a woman in the world and how we were raised and the culture that we live in and the things that we feel like we are and are not allowed to do, allowed to ask for, allowed to pursue. When I started hosting retreats, it was very, very deeply ingrained in my kind of ethos that I can't be making a lot of money. That is unacceptable because I'm trying to hold space and I was hosting, women's fly fish and wellness retreats because I'm holding space for women and trying to make more space for women that can't sit alongside me making a sustainable living. I felt like they were at odds with each other, which they most definitely are not, but I think that is still something that we come up against a lot. So when I started hosting these retreats, I priced them at like nothing. I mean, like something that most people would never, ever consider doing. And I mean, at the time I was happy to do it because I was getting some experience as well, or at least this is how I justified this really terrible business choice. Was like, you're just trying to get some experience, get your feet wet. I hosted a ton of retreats my first year. I made like no money. All of them were sold out instantaneously because they were priced so ridiculously low for these amazing all-inclusive retreats at a private hot springs resort in Montana. But it was so hard for me to come to terms with, Lindsay, it's okay to make a living doing your work, during your life's work, your profession, something that you have put your heart and soul into for really the entirety of your adult life, learning how to fly fish and also learning how to coordinate events and learning how to hold space for people. And then like also being a yoga teacher, also being a fitness trainer, putting all these things together. It's okay for you to make money. That's not, it's allowed. Are men even questioning the idea of it's okay for them to make money doing, hosting these fly fishing travel opportunities? I don't think so. I don't see anybody, I don't see anybody else doing what I did. And it was a mistake, and it was a tough pill to swallow in terms of just realizing where that came from. And it's something that I continue to come up against all of the time, of feeling still like you should be giving back. You should be giving back. And I deeply believe in giving back. And I also believe that at the same time, you can be somebody who's generous and gives back and also run a successful business, and you deserve to make a living, and that's okay as well. So it's been really interesting over the past 5 years in particular, kind of wrestling with the money side of things.
This comes up a lot for the Cairn Project's trailblazers. It's this notion of who are we to be talking about this? Who are we to be asking for money of other people? Because our trailblazers at the Cairn Project are literally asking people to donate money to a cause that matters. And how are we supposed to do that when we feel this weird shame or pressure to not be asking people to support us and pay us for work? I completely know exactly how you feel. As somebody who's now approaching 3 years of self-employment, I still find myself underselling myself, undercharging people, adding more on when I don't actually have the time to be adding more responsibilities for the same price, accepting opportunities that aren't actually helping me work towards my mission. And it is so built into me that it takes really, really conscious work to get out. So we are trying to work with trailblazers now to tell them it is okay to be sharing your story. We deserve to be yelling about our stories so that we're paving the way for other people. And it's really hard for a lot of women to feel like it's okay to be talking about their own personal background and why their adventure matters. I would love to hear your recap of when you were an ambassador for the Cairn Project. Can you share about that?
My adventure with Cairn Project was in 2018. So that took place a year before I launched my business. It's funny. I was rereading, I went back to the website and I was rereading my Q&A last night and kind of bringing myself back to that moment 6 years ago and where I was at then. And at the time, I was going through a lot. I was going through a career change. I was going through a relationship change. I was going through some different health problems. A lot was happening at that time. In retrospect now, at the time, I don't think that I really realized it, but in retrospect, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this process actually really, I think, helped catalyze and push me in the direction of maybe you could launch a business. Even just after running that one fundraiser, which is not the hugest project ever, but a project in and of itself. And, gaining the amount of just sort of confidence through that, I think really probably did have an impact on me being like, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to try this business ownership thing and see what happens. In terms of my experience with that adventure, it was a bikepacking adventure in Minnesota on the North Shore of Lake Superior. So running along the shore of the lake. And it was a struggle. I mean, it was actually a total disaster. I ran into crazy bad weather. I had to wind up cutting the trip short because the weather was so bad. The road that I was biking on is just very, very narrow, tiny little shoulder, and it was ultimately dangerous. And I had to, at the end of the day, kind of just pivot and come to terms with the fact that it wasn't safe for me to continue on given the weather at hand, and just some other circumstances that transpired where I was feeling kind of particularly unsafe. So a lot of things that took place that, again, I couldn't have predicted necessarily and were out of my control. So I feel that recurring theme of these things that you encounter as a business owner, certainly characteristics that I encountered during that time, during that bike packing trip where I was like, oh, this is not going as I thought it was going to go. And I have to change. I have to make some some decisions.
That's super relatable, I'm sure, for a lot of our current and recent trailblazers too, because when you plan an adventure that is typically very big, it takes a lot of intentional planning. Well, there are so many factors that can go wrong. Maybe there's a wildfire, maybe there's a landslide that blocks the road, maybe there's the weather that you encountered, maybe you need a permit and you don't get the permit. And I've always been really impressed with the resilience and pivoting that our trailblazers do when they have to reorganize their fundraiser. Okay, if you keep hearing us talk about trailblazers and you're like, what? What's that? You might love this. At the Cairn Project, volunteer trailblazers are people like you who plan an adventure that they turn into a fundraiser to raise scholarship funds for other girls and women to experience wilderness adventures. You can learn more about the program or apply to be a trailblazer yourself at cairnproject.org/trailblazers. It's in the show notes. A key part of being a trailblazer is adventure storytelling. So much of the outdoor industry is still male-dominated. And the more that we can amplify women's stories, like mine or Lindsay's or yours, the more we can close the gender gap, outdoors and in. Hearing about Lindsay's adventure fundraiser with the Cairn Project made me wonder what Lindsay thought about the gender gap in the fly fishing industry. How can brands in the outdoor industry, or maybe fly fishing and fishing specific or water sports brands, start to better connect with women in a way that's actually really inclusive and not performative?
Pay them. That's like always my answer is like, stop asking women in particular for free labor. Like that is my one plead in the world. I hate to say this. I always hate to say this, but it's something that's so true and something that I feel really passionate about. In my process with this business, the mass majority of people who have asked me for free labor have been women. And I think that really stands testament to how deeply ingrained these ideologies are. And so, there's never been a single man in the past 5 years who's asked me to work for free, whether or not I'm coming in to do some guest education, creating a workshop, doing a presentation, a virtual presentation, in-person, whatever it happens to be. And it really does pay me to say that and realize that. And so I think that when we're talking about representation of women, I always lean toward women need to be championing women far more than we tend to do. And I think that, it moves in both directions, but I think that's really important. I think if we want to really help elevate women, we should be bringing them also into these more like higher level roles as industry professionals, if they so choose, if that's the route that they are hoping to take, which I think a lot of women are. So I think that overall, those are the areas that I feel like are really important. Representation does matter. And I do feel like that should always be a part of the conversation is like, yes, you should have women in all of your marketing and all of your everything, but you also need to have women making decisions and, in these leadership roles as well, versus just being spokespersons, just being models, just being in your branding.
Can you share 3 tips that you have for a woman listening who is thinking about starting her own outdoor business?
So one tip that was shared with me by a fellow woman entrepreneur in the outdoor industry right when I was beginning, her piece of advice was go all in. Don't just dip your toe in. Like if you're deciding to do this, go all in. And that's still, I think about it all the time. And ask for help. I mean, if you're able to, for me, it's hard, if you don't have a bunch of funding available, you oftentimes feel like, okay, I have to wear all the hats. I have to do all the things. If you can find a way to ask for help and use your resources, use your community, do that. Even, if it's just, being in conversation with others and being a part of communities where other people are doing what you're doing in some regard. So finding that sense of community and learning from other people. I mean, you just have to. You can't just be like making it all up the whole time. So use your resources. And I mean, we've already kind of gone over it, but be okay with pivoting. I've found myself doing that obviously many times over. And I think that as much as it can be really hard and it can at moments feel like almost like a failure, it's most certainly not a failure. It's wisdom, and it's paying attention to what has and has not worked. So, I always feel like that is so key to running a business, launching a business.
Let's recap Lindsay's tips. 1, go all in on your mission. 2, find your community. And 3, embrace the pivot. Is it just me, or did these entrepreneurship tips also ring true for adventure and for life? Whether or not you've ever thought about starting your own business, you've probably already faced moments where you had to commit fully to something, had to ask your community for help, or had to make a big life pivot when life got lifey. Maybe it was an adventure that pushed you outside your comfort zone. Maybe it was a scary career shift. Maybe it was starting a podcast. Lindsay's story is a reminder that adventure and business aren't about getting everything perfect the first time. They're about showing up, learning from every moment, and putting one foot in front of the other, even when the path is uncertain. So, what's your next step? What's the idea that you've been mulling on, waiting for that perfect moment? Maybe now is the time to send it. If you want to support the mission of the Alliance for Gender Equity in Outdoor Adventure, I'll give you several options. 1, you can apply to become a trailblazer through our program, the Cairn Project. Trailblazers design an adventure fundraiser that crowdfunds scholarships for the Summit Scholarship Foundation. Go to www.cairnproject.org to learn more. 2, you can spread the word about the Summit Scholarship Foundation to help us advance gender equity on and off the mountain. Check it out at www.summitscholarship.org. And 3, you can share the See Her Outside podcast with a friend. Every single share, 5-star review, or comment helps us share stories to get more girls and women outside. See Her Outside is hosted by me, Angie Marie, and edited by Allison Castonguay, with research by Danielle Peacher. Until next time, go get outside.